Has World War III already begun? I'm making this video right on the heels of the Ukrainian drone attack on Russia and the Russian nuclear-equipped bombers. Now, before we continue, this is important. We are critical of this war, but that does not make us pro-Putin or pro-Russia. Let's get that absolutely straight from the outset. There are a lot of different factors going on in this broad, what we see, emerging global conflict. And in this video, we're going to explore the French and Russian dynamic. But before we go into that, watch this remarkable statement from Senator Lindsey Graham where he basically undermines our diplomatic attempts at peace. It is, in my opinion, disgusting.
President Trump said that Ukraine doesn't have good cards. Well, Russia's much bigger and has a lot more people. I get that. But the world has a lot of cards against Russia. And one of those cards that we have is about to be played in the United States Senate. In America, you have more than one person at the card table. We have three branches of government, and the House and the Senate are poised to act.
First, Senator Graham is giving the Ukrainian people the false hope that more arms and more money are on the way from American taxpayers. I think we're all pretty fed up, both right and left at this point. This war needs to end, and it needs to end now. Okay, we don't need to escalate it. Second, he made this statement right before the drone attacks on the Russian bombers. That's crazy. This is a serious question. Is there a war that Lindsey Graham doesn't like? Okay? Every time there's a chance to wage war, he's right there at the front, ready to cheer on neocon style. Hey, we're going to go in there and bomb the hell out of God knows where. He's always there every single time. And now he's undermining peace again. Anyway, this video isn't about Senator Graham or the neocons. We'll do another video on them for sure in the future. Let's talk about Russia, France, and the broad emerging global conflict. The past two world wars, one over a century ago and the second nearly a century ago, did not begin exactly as most of us have learned. World War I, the Great War, did not begin only because of the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand in Serbia, nor did World War II begin with Hitler's invasion of Poland. There were precursors to both conflicts. Before World War I, there was the Russo-Japanese War, the first war in the modern era where a European power lost to a non-European power, and there was the Italian invasion of Libya. Before World War II, there was the Japanese invasion of Manchuria and the Spanish Civil War. Are we in a similar situation now? Are we feeling, seeing, hearing the rumbles of a larger coming conflict? Possibly. One thing must be said from the outset, and that is that the U.S. has been in a form of forever war since September 11, 2001. Afghanistan, Iraq, various lesser entanglements in Africa and elsewhere. We've had this ongoing war, and it's seen its ebbs and flows over the last 2 decades. But it does not constitute a world war. Now, defense types use the term global war on terror, GWOT, but it is not a world war as we know it, with peer and near-peer states going toe-to-toe with one another. GWOT, though obviously key to the 21st century of the Great Game, was and is a lot of the USA going around and stamping out fires. In some cases, the fires were lit by the U.S. in the first place. Drone strikes and the occasional SEAL team operation were the order of the day. But the world has changed. Russia annexing the Crimea in 2014 was a key turning point. Russia felt that it was under pressure from NATO, which it continued to march eastward year in and year out, it seemed. Some also believe that NATO engineered the removal of a pro-Moscow leader in Kiev in 2014. Putin also saw that the Black Sea Fleet was in potential peril, which is based in Sevastopol in the Crimea, and so moved to annex the peninsula long under Moscow rule and populated generally with ethnic Russians. There are many versions of what went down in Crimea. This is basically where we're at right now. NATO was not happy. Russia wasn't happy, but there was a general peace. That peace would, of course, be broken when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022. It was then that black and white visions of World War II immediately filled the minds of Western leaders. All eyes were drawn toward Moscow to see if Putin would try to engineer a reverse Operation Barbarossa in Central Europe. This thankfully did not come to pass, if it was ever really in the cards. It seems reasonable that Putin might have wanted to take Kiev, and even then, but a push further westward into NATO member states would have been near suicide, and Putin knew and knows that. Regardless, Ukrainian resistance and lots of Western money and weapons checked Russia at the Donbas region, a part of Ukraine that, like the Crimea, is dominated by ethnic Russians. Now, Russia and Ukraine are locked in a particularly ugly attritional war, with both sides sending their young men to die over territory that in the end will probably not mean much globally. What is Ukraine and what is Russia has shifted over the centuries, and the death associated with this particular territorial shakeout gives testament to the willingness of old men to send young men to their deaths. In the end, Russia will probably end up with the Donbas and the Crimea. Okay, they're filled with Russians. Both areas are filled with Russians. It makes sense. Crimea, strategically, the Russians can't give up. They just can't. But this is assuming that other interests don't ramp up the fight in spite. One particularly spiteful individual is President Macron of France, who for the past year has been shaking his French sword at the Russians, even talking about deploying French troops to Ukraine. So NATO forces directly in conflict with Russia. It seems to us that there is now a group of people in NATO and in the West, or in North American West. There are policy people who seem to be okay with escalating this war, which is crazy. There were even reports, and we'll include a link in the description below, saying that France was prepared to take over factories and turn them into arms factories a la World War II or something. This was last year they were talking about this. Of course, this is how regional wars become much bigger wars. If French troops were to directly engage Russian troops on the battlefield, that changes the nature of the Ukraine war fundamentally. Okay, now we're talking global war for sure. Not global proxy war, but global war. What many people don't know, and practically all Americans don't know, is that Macron has been ramping up the rhetoric largely because of recent developments in Africa. In addition to what's going on in Ukraine, Russia has essentially usurped France's position in Francophone Africa, at least to a very large degree. And the French are not happy about it. And Macron is really not happy that this happened on his watch. Though technically independent, Francophone Africa was until very recently utterly dominated by France. We say until recently because starting in 2020, a series of coups rocked the Sahel region of Africa, the area of transition from the Sahara to the north and to the wetter regions of Africa to the south. These coups upended France's position in the area and severely jeopardized the flow of raw materials, particularly uranium, which is vital to France's massive nuke industry. Suddenly, the mines were no longer controlled by the French. French troops were expelled. In some cases, even French ambassadors were kicked out. From Guinea in the west to the border of the Sudan in the east, Francophone Africa has been in chaos of late. In many cases, the new leaders of these countries have looked to, you guessed it, Russia for help. First, the private mercenary army Wagner came in, taking over many of the duties of the French army, protecting gold mines and the like. Now, after the demise of Yevgeny Prigozhin, the former leader of Wagner, Wagner is officially, mostly, part of the Russian army, and in Africa it is known as the Russian Africa Corps. Wonder where they got that name from. France has largely been chased out of Africa, and Russia has played a key part in this. Though not widely known in the United States, France has suffered a serious blow south of the Sahara Desert, in part at the hands of the Russians. That France has long exploited these terribly poor countries for its own benefit, and the people just got fed up, is the key factor in France's forced retreat, it must be said. But that Russia showed up to help usher the French away does not sit well in Paris. In many respects, Macron has been humiliated by the Russians, almost as bad as when his wife slapped him. Sorry, couldn't help but say that. Anyway, he's got something to prove with regard to Russia. This is dangerous for the globe. Such a disposition is unhelpful in the extreme, because when leaders start getting into wars and start letting wars get personal, things get stupid and killy very quickly. Will Macron try to settle the score with French troops in Ukraine? Lord, we pray that he doesn't. For the sake of the world and sanity, we hope not. But the French have always had a chip on their shoulder. We must remember this. And we must also remember that people and countries with chips on their shoulders are prone to doing unwise things. Right now, you have a whole political class in Europe that is fearful of a rise in populism. They fear Trump. They fear that the establishment that they have come up in, that from where they draw their power, okay, the European Union, NATO, etc., are under threat. And that is why they are looking to escalate. At least some people within that establishment are looking to escalate this conflict. And for you and for me and for this country, that is not a good thing.